And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. Upali Nanda. She is the EVP and Global Sector Director for Innovation at HKS, where she oversees a range of innovation practices that work within, through, and beyond the built environment for meaningful impact. Prior to her current role, she served as the Global Research Director for the firm and as the Executive Director for the nonprofit Center for Advanced Design Research and Education. Dr. Nanda teaches as a professor of practice at the Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning at University of Michigan and serves on the board of the Academy for Neuroscience for Architects. She received her bachelor's degree in architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, MA, from National University of Singapore, and a PhD in architecture from Texas A&M University. Dr. Nanda's research has been awarded the AIA Upjohn Grant, European Healthcare Design Research Award, and Journal of Interior Design Scholarship Excellence Award. Recently, Dr. Nanda was recognized with Architecture Records 2018 Women in Architecture Innovator Award, and in a 2021 book of The Women Who Change Architecture for her research on designing spaces that promote healthy behaviors. Please welcome Dr. Nanda to the stage.
My real claim to fame is that I know Nate Butler and Amanda and some key players in the Florida architecture field. So very honored to be here. I couldn't have asked for a better opening than Simone. So I don't know, Simone, if you're still here, but thank you for unlocking minds the way we needed to have this conversation. I also especially appreciate the fact that it's so much nicer out there, and yet you're all in here. So it's funny to have a conversation about the built environment and health and well-being and impact, when really the simplest thing you could do is be out there. And yet we're in here. So I will do my best to make this hour some really engaging conversation of the minds. I am the Global Director of Innovation at HKS, but we're still unpacking what that means. What does it mean to really innovate in the built environment when the role of the built environment is still not understood? When we as a profession are still trying to define what it can do. And perhaps the most important thing in this role is the fact that the built environment negotiates our relationship with nature. The built environment negotiates our relationship between non-living and living things. The role we play is so pivotal. Then how did we get to a point where our profession is so commoditized? So that is part of why this whole movement towards building brains is so important. Our world is changing so quickly, and it feels overwhelming at times. So many of you are the stalwarts field around sustainability and are always facing this question on why is it so hard to have this conversation? And now we have this entire new AI-driven world where it feels like these bits and bytes that have bitten into our life. We don't even know how to negotiate this relationship between the physical and digital. Such an interesting time. Someone said to me recently that our generation is the generation that has seen two revolutions in its time: the internet revolution and now the AI revolution. How many people still remember the sound of the modem? Right? I remember it. It's like, oh, I'm now connected. There's so many people who don't remember it, but some of us do, and we have seen that. And the agility it takes today to keep going where you're shape-shifting all the time is enormous. We used to talk about plans and footprints, but now we have to be aware of the cloud print. And I don't just mean data centers, right? Which is another whole booming industry. But what's the digital connection between this physical ecosystem that we're creating? We used to talk about building for the senses. Now we have sensing buildings. We talked about being human-centered, and somewhere along the line, and definitely during COVID, we realized perhaps human centricity hasn't gotten us too far. Perhaps what we need to be is living-centered and understand the relationship between the built and the natural. And living organisms are natural organisms. So that shift has just happened. We've talked a lot about prediction. We love prediction. We love a good simulation. But somewhere down the line, we've had to think about what's the proof? Has it really worked? All those amazing predicted energy use, what does that mean for the person at the end who's actually living in that environment? This conversation is about linking design to outcomes. It's also about realizing that what we design today is not just the built environment. Our definition of design has to change because the outcomes we affect are different. So much known about daylight and the impact on energy and health, yes? How many people have designed something where you've had the perfect simulation for daylight, and yet you never get the energy use because what's gotten in the way is the human behavior on the other end? Yeah? The delta between design and outcomes is always operations. It's always the people factor. But we know so much, right? We know so much about a few things. We know a lot about exposure to nature and mental well-being. During COVID, I thought it was fascinating that all of us, our entire industry, was talking about air quality and how important our ventilation systems were and how we should be paying attention, not just to our HVAC systems, but just our ventilation mechanisms that are out there. And yet, what were people doing? They were buying hand sanitizers. It didn't matter how much you said, this is airborne, pay attention to the air. Air was invisible. Fear was driving, and the perception of cleanliness is what we kept buying for. Said, this is something I can take, I can buy, I can clean my hands, I can feel clean. I can't see the air. You can tell me that the air matters. I don't see it. And perception of cleanliness and how that drove fear really affected what we were investing in. And that's the power of thinking about the human brain. Is so much of what we do is driven by perception. There's work we did years and years ago around how simply exposure to art for a limited duration of time could change the amount of anxiety medication that was given to women in a psych holding room. All we changed was conditions of art on the wall, and the amount of anxiety medication changed when there was biophilic images. Think about that for a second. The hospital in that particular case saved $30,000 a year on medication by changing the environment. Our environment had a direct, measurable, pharmaceutical impact on anxiety. And yet, how many of us see an RFP that says, I want your building to reduce anxiety for my occupant? Anyone? Somewhere along the line, the deep value proposition we have as an industry has gotten lost. We talk a lot about data. Data is fun to talk about. We don't talk enough about the delta, the difference we are making in real lives. And that's where the power lies. What's the real difference? What difference can we make? In a sense, every project we do is a lab. We're asking questions like, how did my finishes, my FF&E, my tech work out? Like, how did the building perform based on EUI projections? How did my occupant feel? Did I get an ROI from my capital investment? Those are the kind of questions. How many people have a scope of work that lets you test these questions? Anyone? Anyone have an RFP that says, hey, I'd love for you to design this and then stay with me for 2-3 years to see how all of these things worked out? Isn't that crazy? The fact that CapEx and OpEx happen in 2 different universes is so fascinating because everything we do has an impact for years and years and years and years. And yet we haven't developed our vocabulary for being able to say that this first cost here is going to impact you for years later. And part of our conversation today is about this one little thing we can focus on that may change the conversation around the built environment. Because one of the things that we don't talk enough about is even this idea of beauty and elegance, the things that we are all passionate about, have a direct impact, in fact, a measurable impact, on how people feel and how they work. And when we are armed with that insight about the art and science, about the human, we could unlock potential for our entire industry. This link between design and outcomes, and Simone kind of laid this groundwork for it, that our definition of design has to shift. We have to think about innovation as something that links design to the outcomes we want, and our definition of design has to extend. We have to think about strategy, operations, experience, and then say, to do that, to achieve your strategy, your operations, and your human experience goals, how are you going to design the physical world, the built environment, and the digital world, which is now interfacing with our built environment in very new ways? That's how we have a system solution to offer anyone. That is why you start seeing firms, I think someone gave the MK Think example of build less, solve more. We have to solve for what the organizations and the societies and the communities will be solving for years after the building is in place, and make the building the vessel to solving that. And that shifts the conversation because design becomes this big, all-encompassing thing, and the built environment becomes the tool that can do so much, and you didn't even realize it could. In this link between design and outcomes, our conversation today is about the link between buildings and brains. Why? Why is it so important? This year in the World Economic Forum, at Davos, they decided that it was going to be the year of the brain. As we start having AI come all around us, we are realizing that our brain capital, what's in here, which is feeding the machine, is the most important thing that we could potentially invest in. Here's the economic case of why building brains is so important. First of all, mental illness costs us $280 billion a year in the US alone. $282 billion in the US alone. That's $9,000 a second. If I can make a case between what I'm building and how it is impacting your mental state directly, what kind of a value proposition does that unlock for me? Here's the other part. Our brains actually need to develop new skills because what we used to do, a machine can do for us now. Not all of it. And this is tough to read. This is a McKinsey report where, as future workforce demands are evolving, brain health and the skills right here, what makes you creative, what makes you have those 9 ideas in 30 seconds or 8 ideas in 30 seconds, that's the true currency. So creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, curiosity, social influence and leadership and analytical thinking, those are the kind of skills we need to build, which means we really need to stop and think about how am I exercising my brain? What's the gym for my brain the way I have a gym for my body? Where do I go? And what if design could provide it? Here's the third part, which is also really critical and we don't talk enough about. We cannot make environmentally responsible decisions without healthy brains. You need to be able to have a really clear way of thinking to understand long-term decisions. And as it turns out, we cannot have healthy brains without healthy environments and without healthy buildings. There's a direct correlation between air quality and health that's just coming out now in the literature. There's a correlation between the two that we are just unpacking, and this opens a brand new world for us. The uh-oh is oops, not sure how much we're actually putting towards it right now. I feel like every day is an uh-oh moment. You hear something new, you read something new, like, uh-oh. Now I need to get this in. I need to think about this too. How many people have this moment at least once a day? It's like, whoops. And it's interesting to be in this time where so much exciting stuff is happening and you can't keep pace. So let's talk about three big things today, right? One is this relationship between brain and climate. Here's something we know. The risk of developing mental disorders is 71% lower in people in urban spaces who have access to green spaces. It's a pretty compelling statistic for urban planners in the room and designers in the room. Just give access to green spaces, give access to views, make that connection simple. Here's something else, though, that we don't talk about enough. Part of the reason, like our brain, is really stopping us from taking climate change seriously. For those naysayers that you might have challenges with, it's not them. It's literally that we're in fight or flight mode all the time. For 200,000 years, we have evolved to thinking about find food, make shelter, mate. That's it. That's it. That's all we needed to do for survival. It's only over the last 100 years that we have started thinking about the future. To give yourself some grace and give your clients some grace and give the people you're talking with some grace, because it's hard. It's hard for us. It's neurologically, biologically, physiologically hard for us to think about the future. And so what do? No one wants to believe that daily activities, like switching on a light or checking your phone or washing your hair more than you need it, is responsible for global disaster. It's too hard. I can't. So what's easier? It's easier for me to change my mind about the issue than changing my habit. It's easier for me to say, I don't believe, than to make the tiny changes in my habit. And this is what understanding the brain can do is, oh, this is actually a behavioral issue. How do I communicate it differently so I can make it easier for someone to make that decision that has such a huge impact? This dual pathway from the environment to the brain, the fact that extreme weather and heat events, air quality, stress and anxiety directly impact your brain, that brain, depending on where it is, and you can address it with different design strategies, but that brain then either makes pro-environmental or anti-environmental decisions. It makes investment decisions. If it's a healthy brain, it can make more long-ranging decisions, and then you can have behavior change, more climate change communication, and you can overcome some psychological barriers. If we understand this, how many conversations around sustainability are really about human psychology? How did those two become separate decisions? Because the body and the brain and the environment, those are the three most absolute nested scales. One truth, my brain is in my body. Second truth, my body is in an environment. Those are our two absolutes. Sometimes when I do this talk, and I'm not talking to a room full of architects, I'll ask the question, raise your hand if you're nowhere. Anyone? Anyone who is not somewhere? You're always somewhere, and yet you have such little perception of how that somewhere is changing you. This is tough to read, so forgive me, but climate anxiety and climate-related PTSD is a thing. The amount of mental disorders that are happening because we are anxious about our future is a thing. And unless we get psychologists and sustainability professionals in the same conversation with the public, we are losing a huge opportunity. This is a great diagram that shows the relationship between brain health and between environmental health. Really thinking about all the drivers like pollution, mass migration, exposures, materials, to things that we really also have to think about: green skills, cognitive adaptability, critical thinking, innovation. That's a conversation that hasn't happened enough. You know where it's happening? Nature just published an article about the importance of the environment on human brains and evolution. You know what they never talked about? They talked about the environment at length. They never mentioned the built environment. We as a profession have to get out of the competition and put a stake in the ground on why it matters. Because we negotiate the relationship between the living and the non-living. That's what the built environment does. And there are real-life examples, like a project that we did 2 years ago, the UC San Diego Live Learn neighborhood. It was fascinating. We also did a 2-year longitudinal study. And not only did it eventually exceed the predicted energy use intensity, but there was also an 8.2% reduction in self-reported depression of college students. How much more powerful to say, you can use these strategies and it can help you operate more efficiently, sure. But you know what else it's going to do? It's going to make your students happier and healthier and more able to take up the academic challenge. If 1 in 4 students has a mental anxiety disorder, which they did, this is such a compelling case. And we can look at the entire report that talks about all the different strategies, but design makes a difference. And unless we become very articulate about saying what design can do, how can we get paid to do it at scale? We don't do drawings, we change lives. We have to really get comfortable talking about it. And that's the relationship between brain and health. There's some fascinating new research that's coming out right now that shows that our surroundings, buildings, streets, and sensory cues directly affect the body's stress system. Neuroinflammation, exposure to different types of facades, in fact, has a response in different types of the brain. This is brand new research, just 2 or 3 years old right now. In fact, your stress pathways, your hormones, your inflammation, your long-term health gets impacted based on just the environments you see. So we've known about air quality, we have known about daylight, but this is about just our exposure to facades, about the visual stress that we are absolutely responsible for as a community. There's fascinating research that says low complexity facades can actually drop skin conductance. They can lead to boredom and disengagement. There's a fascinating article that says boring buildings might be killing you. There's a movement called Humanize that's around it, that boring buildings can kill you. They are long-term chronic stress inducers. High complexity facades can do the opposite, and our work is determining what's the level of complexity. We play with it intuitively. But that magic that's in your black box of a brain as a community, why does no one else see its value at scale? That's what we need to change. Facade design directly shapes stress, directly, measurably, neurologically, and unmistakably. Here's another fascinating set of research around enriched environments. What you see on the upper right of that screen is an experiment that happened in the 1970s with mice with mouse brains. And what they found those little spindly diagrams that you see is actually the brain synapses. And they found that mice that lived in this standard environment, unenriched environment, they had a certain level of synapse development, but when you put them into an enriched environment, which was really having more room to play, more room to move, and more room to socialize, motor, sensory, social, and cognitive, that you see on the left, new synapses in the brain developed. I'll repeat that. Those who lived in enriched environments grew new synapses in the brain. That study with mouse brains has now been replicated with dementia and with human brains, and showing that being in enriched environments, and it's pretty simple, motor, sensory, where we can move, things we can sense, who we can interact with, and what engages our brain. Simone was showing an example of a playground. The playground is the best example of an enriched environment. It engages your body, it engages your mind, it engages you with other people, and it keeps you moving. And that can actually unlock neurogenesis, new synapses in the brain. What could we do if our senior living environments were enriched environments and could stave off dementia and keep us cognitively active for longer? AARP now has an entire division on music, arts, and design, because we have made the case that environments matter, art matters, design matters. What does it mean in real life? We've been testing on ourselves in HKS. We have living labs. Sometimes when clients don't listen, what do? You test on yourselves. You try it out and you say, hey, here, this could be interesting. And our living lab in HKS at Atlanta office, which was a collaboration with the Center for Brain Health, we found a reduction in multitasking, increased number of focused task completions, and an overall increase in brain health index. But what was fascinating is also there was an increase in connecting with others. So that is a fascinating way of making it real, saying what does it mean for the real workplaces we design? And why is it that they tell us that this is the brief, design the space, and you aren't really engaged in designing the strategy or the operations or the people strategy? Would it work? How many times have you walked into a building that you've designed and seen it operated in a way that you did not intend? Anyone who has not seen that happen? Everyone, all of us. We walk in and say, wait, this isn't what we meant, this isn't what we intended. What got lost in translation? Somewhere down the line, they thought the architect's job was to create drawings. Someone else constructs it, someone else operates it, someone else is responsible for the outcomes that we put in place. In the theater of life, how do we always forget the stage? Because that's what we do as a profession. So, the most unpacked opportunity for us as a field is when we talk about emotion, we think it's a nice qualitative thing to do. It's in our concept boards. We feel really good about it envisioning. But it's a loosey-goosey thing. It might, in fact, be the most precise thing that we do. Designing for emotions is at the core of what we do. Good design inspires emotions. Amazing design inspires intended emotions. What if you could go in and say, I can tell you, based on both the art and the science, this is how someone's going to feel. And when they feel this way, this is how it's going to impact their behaviors, this is how it's going to impact their health, and this is how it's going to impact your investment and return. Here's my favorite one to unpack. The design of awe. Has anyone read what's come around this topic recently? It's fascinating. Ask ChatGPT. Fine. When you go on a vacation, you actively seek out awe, right? But awe is incredible. It has an anatomy. It's an anatomy that is now being understood. Look at these places for a second and say, why do they inspire awe? Just close your eyes for just a second, just 1 second, and think about a place that you've been to recently that has inspired awe. Each one of you could think of an example. Anyone who couldn't think of an example of where you've felt awe. I'm glad, because then I would say, please get out of the room and take a vacation. That makes me happy. Awe is fascinating because when you experience it, it creates these little earthquakes in the mind. Like everything shifts for a second. But what's even more fascinating is research shows that when we experience awe, it bolsters happiness, health, and social interactions. In fact, they argue that one of the reasons that humans have gotten along with each other and cooperated with each other is when they experience awe together. When you have a group of people that experience something awesome, and they immediately bond. It could be in a stadium for that perfect shot. It could be in the sunrise, where you have other people and you don't know them at all, but why are you smiling and grinning at them? They feel like they're part of your community because you've experienced something together. Awe does something fascinating to our brains. It starts reducing the activation in our default mode network. The part of our brain, the DMN, the default mode network, is what keeps us in the fight or flight. It's the part of our brain that keeps saying, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? When we get out of that, and that happens when we experience awe, our prefrontal cortex activates, where we can actually do higher order thinking. Our parietal network gets activated, where we can help people focus on really the experience. And it takes us out of the me mode. Awe can help us get connected, and there's neurobiological evidence to show that. Awe is also something that actually has a very simple construct. It has two very simple criteria. And I want you to think of that experience you remembered and see if it meets these criteria. One, the stimulus has to feel perceptually vast. What we see, what it made us feel, like it has to feel big, feel bigger than us. And the second thing it has to do, it has to update our mental schema. What this really means is it has to be just a little unexpected, more than what we expected, for it to be qualified as awe. And that does something. It makes our sense of self reduce. It makes us realize, oh my God, I'm just a small thing in this incredible large universe, and increases my feeling of connection to others. And yet, in the work we do day to day, why is there so little attention given to emotions like awe? Look at what we just said. If I design something that is so incredible that it inspires awe, it will increase your sense of gratitude, reduce your sense of self, make you feel connected to each other. This is why beauty matters, because it can instill that sense of awe. And it can do all of those things that you want to do to a community, to a corporation, to society. But we don't give it enough attention because we have kept it in big words in coffee table books that only we are reading. Why do we measure function but take emotion for granted when we know emotion can unlock the functional potential that we're looking at? We make emotional decisions 5 times faster than we make rational decisions. You can talk about all the data. In the end, somebody will make a decision and you'll be like, how did you get there? What's the logical pathway? And sometimes there isn't, because the mind makes emotional decisions 5 times faster than it makes rational decisions. So you have to understand, how do we design for emotions? Not just in the design of the built environment, but in the design of every interaction. Why do we take the art and the science of being human for granted? Because each of us can do it. We know how to do it. It's why we sketch and doodle and think. It's why if I asked you in this moment, what would you do to make this space feel different, you would be able to tell me. But we don't talk about it enough. And I would propose, and I'm glad we'll have time for conversation, because some of this might be controversial, but I would say we have 4 big challenges. 1, representation. We fall in love with the representation. Would you agree? We love our renderings. We love a good drawing. We love a good plan view. Which human has understood a plan view entirely? I do not know. But we love it. And then we do all of these amazing convenings where we talk about our representation. The second is that makes it really hard for us to have incentive to measure the human experience, because the client isn't asking us to say, hey, once we open, we'd love to come around and let's just walk around and say, how do people feel? Why do they feel this way? Did we actually achieve it? We talk about post-occupancy evaluations. I hate that word. There is nothing post about occupancy. If it's post-occupancy, you're dead. It's occupancy. It's all about living in the environments that we actually designed. So when we think about what we do is just punch lists, then we don't have the opportunity to pack a real punch. That happens when we talk about that incentive to measure human experience in meaningful ways. The third is disciplinary arrogance, and that's not just for architects, but have you ever met an architect who could not solve everything? I was trained as an architect. I don't know how to answer a question saying I can't do that. Like, sure, I can also do that. Another really arrogant field is the neuroscientists. They do the same. Every discipline is so arrogant and so convinced that they can solve the world's problems, but only they can, and no one else. And yet the systemic problems we have relies on the fact that we need interdisciplinary humility to say, I don't know, and maybe your words and my words look different, and I don't know if you're speaking the same language, but I'm pretty sure that the world is changing so fast that we need to learn from each other. It comes back to the curiosity that Simone was talking about earlier. And curiosity comes from humility, saying, oh, shucks, one more day of uh-oh. And it's okay, because that's what we will need. And the last challenge, which I think is huge, humongous, is public awareness. We need mass media to talk about what design can do, what the built environment can do. We need people to say that, no, I want to be engaged in these projects because I know it matters to my life, and it'll matter to my life for much longer, because people will come and go, operations will come and go, but the built environment, it's going to set the stage for a very long time. And people have to be aware to articulate, and that's why the emotional component is so important. We have to go beyond the aesthetics of the appearance that we love celebrating to the synthetics of experience. We have to know what these images mean, like what does somebody really feel like? How do we articulate it, and how do we show that our design decision was responsible, if not entirely, in a very critical part to get us to that emotion? Every design decision is a hypothesis. Everything. The design of that chair, the design of this flooring pattern, the design of this room, which I have many, many, many thoughts about. Lived experience is the outcome. The outcome is always the lived experience, and we don't talk enough about that. So here's my proposal, and I'd love to have a conversation about it, but this idea of making practice a creative lab, which is anchored on the art and the science of being human, not being human-centered, but being human, because here's the thing, our decisions about our planet are still coming from here. We have to really understand what it means to be human, how humans make decisions, how humans interact with nature, how humans interact with technology, how humans interact with each other. And the things we do, from the hospitals to the homes to the workplaces, that's where all of this plays out. I'd love to have a world where we have synthetic salons, like where people design outside the visual artifact. Like what would happen if we met and we said, you had to show your design in a theatrical production. You cannot show a rendering. What would we do? How would we communicate? I am going to petition AIA Florida for Lived Experience Awards. For awards that come from the people, about people, for people, and show how the built environment changed the lives we lead. And we don't have them in our industry. I would like to propose play dates. You don't need another webinar. You don't need another seminar. You don't need another person coming to you and saying, here's what you should do. But play dates would be fun. It would be fun for us to go and play with people we don't typically play with. Between psychologists and neuroscientists and climate scientists and artists and designers, let's play more so we can unlock the potential in the strange time that we're in. I, again, love the term intrapreneurs. We need entrepreneurship in our industry now. Because if we compete with each other, we lose our relevance to the larger world that is changing so quickly. And finally, a commitment to measuring the immeasurable. Don't fall into the trap of measuring just what's easy to measure. Building performance studies are amazing. We cannot stop doing them. But match it with a human performance study, with a human emotion study, and saying that daylight that filters through, that I can tell you with so much precision how much it'll be, what is it actually going to do to the human? And what will it do to their interactions? And let us blend the business. Not even bridge it, but blend the distance between design and science. Because that would be some real opportunity. This is something that we've just started recently. It's called the Building Brains Coalition. It is for everyone in this room. It is bringing neuroscientists, climate scientists, urban planners, architects, interior designers, and policymakers to one conversation about how buildings can affect our brains. You're all welcome to join. There is no MOU. It's like an informal match.com. There's no time to make life more complicated. Let's just do this together. Let's all figure out our gives and gets. What do we have to give? What do we need to get? Where do we converge? And that's really why we're also starting this other project that's called Project Y. Stay tuned for that. That's a public awareness campaign that's going to be around the art and science of how spaces shape us. Watch out for that hashtag. We want people to ask, why does the space make me feel this way? Have architects unpack, oh, I know why it does. This is what I did. I played with the proportions. I played with the lighting. I played with the complexity. I played with the sensory environment. It was all very intentional. Do you feel that? Yeah, that's what I designed it for. We are flipping the conversation. We want to go to the public and say, why? Have you noticed why spaces make you feel the way they do? Oh, by the way, there was a designer's mind that contributed to that feeling. And so stay tuned for that. And really, what I'd end with is this entire conversation about building brains is about building better futures together. We have no time to compete, but we have so much to give. Thank you for your time. All right, rake me over the coals. Let's have a conversation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm all for fewer boring buildings for sure, but I'm a little skeptical that more complexity is always psychologically better. Mm-hmm. In fact, especially with our youth, I'm concerned about the almost lack of boredom.
Yep.
And I'm curious what your thought is on the kind of mix that we have to deal with in our kind of changing world of being overly distracted.
I love that question. And you're taking pictures of me in a very undignified position, so I demand a do-over. That's a great question, and only a designer can ask this question. because research findings applied outside of context are very dangerous. Why designers need to engage with the science is because there is always contextual application. Too little is bad, too much is bad. We are the Goldilocks problem forever. What's just right for this context, for this site, for this population? So you're right. I don't think the takeaway from that research is more complexity is good. It's just the fact that often with facade design, we have gotten to a point of no complexity, and that's not serving us well. But you are right, and those are the kind of minds we need to engage. I'll share a story. Years ago when I did that research on biophilic art, we had this image that did really well, and it reduced anxiety medication, and I had a hospital from Singapore call me and said, fascinating research, we really loved it. We've decided we're going to take this poster and we'll put it all over the hospital. I'm like, no, that is wrong at so many levels. It will not work, but I had no evidence to cite to say why that's so wrong. I had evidence for why that one image was right in one context. And so I had to really say, well, once you're familiarized with it, it won't have the same impact. When you put it in a different place, it won't have the same impact. It was a longer, nuanced conversation. Why I talk so much about play is because when we become prescriptive, we lose the opportunity with design. So you want to know the science, but designers can play. Science is clay. It's the findings that unlock potential. The art is in making something new with the science. And then you'll make something new, and you'll have new questions, and science will follow. So when we have, and I always worry about that sometimes we'll have someone who has the science and say, this is what thou shalt do. Well, thou has constraints. Thou has different challenges, and your study was not with my population or with my place. But unless I really get engaged in the conversation, I cannot unpack that nuance. So I really appreciate that question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm Melody Bishop. Thank you for being here. And I want to share that 25 years ago, Dr. Richard Jackson, presented to Grassroots and said this exact thing and said, architects, you can make a difference.
Yeah.
And what I found, in Jacksonville, we reached out to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We got a $500,000 grant. We began to process. What happened was we said, okay, we're going to start something that will find a way to prove that we'll be able to make a difference. And then if we write that grant, we can go after the really big dollars, the Gay Foundation, that kind of thing. But what happened was in the very place we were going to try it, they said, well, you're going to change our neighborhood, and we'll have people moving in, and we'll lose the ability for the people who live here to be able to continue living there. My point is, what foundations, whether it's AIA, who would help support that research? Because you got to do it over time. A 2-year, 5-year, 10-year. Who is ability right now? And that was 25 years ago.
Sure.
Who is available now to help prove our theory? Because if you work with the scientists, that's what we did. We had the university, we had the Mayo Clinic, we had architects working together to come up with a plan, and then we couldn't actually make it go forward.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in 2 parts. First of all, the Project Y is actually funded by the Peterson Foundation. And that's a foundation that is looking at the intersection of neuroscience and architecture, amongst other things. So new foundations are getting aware. The other companies that we work with, Google's really interested in this. Ford is really interested in this. Ford actually has an entire retail strategy now that is around the human science. Fascinating. Their entire work around their new dealerships is around unpacking the human science in an environmentally responsible way. So we are starting to see corporations. I think the piece, and I've been there, I've been on the recipient side of grants, and it's hard because we try to prove the relevance of built environment outside of other players in the conversation. So the first thing we need to do is we need to become part of this bigger conversation with policymakers, with operational experts, with strategists, with true innovators in the industry overall, and say the built environment is part of the story. When we try to make the story exclusively about the built environment, we will fail because, to your point, we are not responsible for the end outcome alone. So we need to partner drastically outside of our field to who is trying to make a systemic difference and where are they losing the opportunity to bring the built environment in. And that will give us a much bigger stage, and I think we will see more grants coming out. But I've been there. I can totally feel that. There's one in the back. Sorry. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. Listen, I think this might just be the crescendo of the entire conference. Thank you. The most amazing thing I've seen. Listen, I've got to give a shout out to one of the first mentor I probably ever have. I think I saw Brooke Scarpa show up, and Larry Scarpa's here. But my question is, that slide you had with number 3 about how we, what was that about how we, like, you know, do our own thing? Like
Disciplinary arrogance?
Okay, so here's my question to you. We do, you know, our own thing. We design for us, but we design for our client.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's not us.
It's not
It's
us.
our client. And we have to give them what they want. So, just share a little bit about like that dichotomy of like why do you know how much do we integrate like our own, you know, like force them into doing what is the right thing versus accepting what the program is. And you know what I mean?
I
That's all.
absolutely do. Yeah, I again appreciate the question, and everybody else feels it around the room, right? So I would say it's 3 things. First, the long game is educate the client. I have realized often in my own life that people hear you based on the door you walk in from. You walk in as a vendor, they hear a vendor. You need to be in different conversations and different tables at the right time for the long game to get someone curious right up front saying, ooh, that's interesting. How do I find an architect who does this kind of thing? So that's the long game. In the short game, I would say every client, so the first thing we need to do is we need to inform the brief. Why don't we help write the brief? Who gave us the brief? How did you decide that these are the number of rooms, this is your program, this is what we're going to do? It's a book around problem seeking that someone was talking about. That's what it was. The program determines so much. Why aren't we up there informing the program? That's why teams that can do that are so valuable. The second is every client has a client. Usually the client's client is the end user. So framing the conversation with the client around, just remind me again, I know you've said this to me, but remind me again, who are we actually doing this for? And do you think they're actually going to receive it well? And finding it in a different language, because people expect an architect to say a certain kind of thing. And if we go too far beyond that comfort zone, the door closes. Bring different people through the door. Bring different people. It doesn't have to be your voice. Amanda was asking me earlier today saying, hey, have you given this presentation internally? And I'd say, yeah, not as much, because in my own organization, everybody knows me. If Upali says one more thing, you're like, yeah, okay. You are listening to me, and if I take you to HKS, HKS will listen to you. That's just how life is. You have to get unexpected voices. You have to realize this is the message. Whose voice can communicate that? And sometimes it's not us. Who's the client going to listen to at what point? Make them the advocate. And our advocacy in that has to be sometimes very quiet.
Thank you for your presentation. It was relevant and very important. My question has to do with whether or not I'm sure you are, but it wasn't mentioned, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, which was founded over 20 years ago by the AI chapter of San Diego. Could you comment on that a little bit? Because I find that to be an amazing resource.
It's one of those things that it's so ingrained that then you forget to mention it. But my personal journey started, so I sit on the board for ANFA. I was one of the 6 pioneers when John Eberhard started. I was the doe-eyed grad student who did her PhD and walked out into the world and say, I'm going to change the world. This is so important. Everything's going to change. This is like the grants 25 years ago saying, this is so important. Of course everyone gets it. I did one very strategic thing. I stayed on the practice side. So I worked in practice. I've always been a researcher in practice. I'm a pracademic. I teach right now in academia and help academics understand why this is so hard in practice. But yeah, ANFI has been on this journey, and I would say that ANFI is an incredible organization. Their conference is coming up in September at the Salk Institute. And it's a group of incredible scientists and incredible neuroscientists. What we need is more of you who are the bridges. We need the human bridges who can say, this is what the client is asking for. Help me unpack this in a voice that they will understand. We need more people who can do jugaad, going back to Simone's presentation earlier. We need some jugaad, we need some creativity. We can't be so convinced about, or so precious about our message that we assume everybody should get it. And then we are the victim saying, when no one gets it. I just told you, the brain's not computed, like, we can't. When somebody doesn't get it, it's because there's a resistance in their brain, in their mind. We need to be really creative to unlock it. Okay, Amanda said, thank you so much.